Excellent. Right, we're coming in now. Excellent. We are live. We are live. Well, real treat for everybody tonight. Welcome, everybody. Welcome along to this evening. We got the wonderful Wendy Sunshine here with us, and I'm really been looking forward to this because Wendy and I have spoken many times before. Welcome, Wendy.
Thanks so much, Andrew. I'm just thrilled to be here with your community and chat with you as ever.
Well, this is going to be great. This is going to be really good. Hi, Zoe. Say hi when you come in, everybody, so we can see you there. It's great to be back in Facebook again, doing our lives, because I had a bit of a break out of that doing it in YouTube, but it's great. So we're going to dive straight in today because Wendy's very kindly also done some slides for us. While we really explore, I think the key tonight, Wendy, is exploring how much crossover there is really when we think about childhood educational psychology from a progressive development point of view, and what that looks like from a parenting model of which you've written books about, and that crossover to how we think about our relationship with our dogs and bringing up dogs, and allowing ourselves to go there and think that actually it's not just something that we want to feel nice about, that there's a lot of substance to it that we can really dive into, which is included in your excellent book, by the way. So thank you so much for sending me this copy. Tender Pause. I'm going to reference this a little bit today. How science-based parenting can transform our relationship with dogs. Now, this is available in the States now. I think it's available on pre-order in the UK. Is that right, Wendy? I think so, and Europe. But, you know, it was this book really that brought us together, wasn't it, Wendy? I think really.
Yes, you were kind enough to speak with me and share some thoughts. And I'm especially excited because one of the comments you made early on was how this community has attracted so many expert carers who have had their own unique dog and had trouble finding answers and solutions. And they just went down all these different rabbit holes. And you talk about that individual experience, and it just resonated so much with this model. It's amazing. The more research I did, the more my mind got blown, actually.
This is the beautiful thing, isn't it? Because I think when we start thinking about the richness really of the individual lived experience, and we want to have a window into that of another, because obviously the one that we can truly validate is our own, then there is a huge richness there. And whilst we feel supported by the objective side of things and the science, there's also an understanding that we need to be brave enough to accept the anecdotal and the subjective too, because as in what we see, almost a study of one, if you like, because that's invariably where that richness of the lived experience lives, you know. And the book really, you know, you can tell where you've come from with this, I think, in regarding to some of the things you've done in the past with thinking about human children and parenting, and the big focus on emotional well-being and the importance of secure attachments. And we were saying off air, you know, a lot of the stuff that I learned in my human psychology degree, going back a while now, especially around things like social processing, social pain, attachment, was done on studies that included dogs.
Isn't it mind-blowing how we use dogs as models to understand ourselves, but we forget that we can also work it the other way. We can benefit from human understanding and perhaps share it, look through that lens at the dogs. It's once we start sharing information across these species, obviously we know we're not dogs, and I don't want anybody to confuse me to think that we do, but we actually have a shocking amount in common. And in fact, I had to justify to myself at first when I saw the parallels. I thought, this is silly. How could this have anything to do with, you know, raising a dog and raising a kid? But the more I looked into this mammalian attachment neurobiology, it was like, wow, we just hit those. We have the same neurotransmitters. We have a lot of the same caregiving, the same needs. It's just, and it's profound when you start to look at it that way. We just have a new appreciation. I got a big kick out of your talks with the Sindor and the people from Barks too, because they talk about parenting much more comfortably than Americans often talk about parenting dogs. think there's studies along those lines too. And you had Rachel Michaud on who looked at that attachment. There's so many converging points. It's true.
This is why I really value all of you to come into the group to talk to us, because again, we were saying off air, there is no one thing that is the thing that we have to think about. There is no one answer. There is no one model. It is about having many voices for all these different threads that we can help us then be better at turning up to not just our dogs, but our loved ones around us, and actually better at turning up for ourselves, actually, because we have a better sense of self when we understand a lot of these constructed norms that we get pushed through and the impact it has on us and our own social safety needs, our own emotional safety needs.
Absolutely. And I was privileged to help write that book, The Connected Child, in collaboration with child development experts who really opened my eyes, because they worked with children whose needs were so deep and unusually difficult for parents to cope with. And so they needed some help. And these professors, particularly the late Karen Purvis, who was like magical with the children. But they had to dig deep into the very best practices and all the things that would be supportive. It's like taking out your entire toolkit and throwing everything at the wall. And what they found too is that all these different interventions supported each other and worked synergistically. So just doing one thing alone wasn't necessarily enough. You wanted to bring everything you had to this situation in the context of understanding the child's needs, and looking and I mean, even something so simple that child development people talk about is they talk about two types of behavior, externalizing and internalizing. And those are two ways of showing stress and distress to the situation. Well, that was an eye-opener for me, because I mean, in the same family, I grew up with a sibling who had a very different style than me, but it showed that we were both expressing our distress in different ways. And when you see that too with puppies and dogs, you start to realize, oh, they have a need that we're maybe not realizing yet. And if we can cue into that, what can open up? What worlds of possibility can open up? It can be just quite amazing. I could go on and on about that.
No, I hear you, and I think one of the reason this group's called dog-centered care is because I took my lead from child-centered care, which is the movement forward there, which is a case of moving away from some of the old models where children were kind of disenfranchised based on some external view of who kids were and what they need, and actually thinking we're going to empower that individual child so they can share their story, often a survival story with us.
Right. And how much, I'm sorry, how much harder is it if they don't have language yet, right? and that's the case of our dogs.
And how much harder is it if attempts through behavior to express need is already being either corrected or being diverted to a different behavior, even with reinforcement, when we think about some of the positive stuff, even for kids, where we're just looking for an appropriate response from our point of view. It's even harder to communicate then. So what you're talking about there, some of the behaviors become very detached and quite bizarre because they're not connected to the original emotional response anymore. We're kind of diluting those responses and that ability for that animal or the child to communicate even.
Right. Imagine how desperate they feel. I mean, and if this is part of why I think I related to the professors so well, is that even though I don't have children, I was a child and I had a kind of rocky time of it, and I didn't always understand why. And as I learned at their, from them, I began to see. And part of it is that I didn't have a voice. I really, I was like the third-class citizen or fourth-class, depending on the circumstance at the moment. And so how do you cope when you, like you're saying, the dogs, we might correct them, we might tell them to be quiet, we might say, oh, go play by yourself over there. but there's still that core need that perhaps has never been addressed. And just by widening our lens and our perspective and addressing that need, wow, so much more well-being is possible. Is quite profound. I'm sure you've seen it with dogs that you've worked with in your practice.
Definitely. And I think when we start to have a bit of a mindset shift about how we see behavior and what we're supporting, and it can start to feel a bit overwhelming, because you think, wow, there's a lot of stuff, and I think especially for the fact that we're all kind of indoctrinated in a conformist metric version of behavior and how to behave. And whilst we need to have some structures in place for us to get on, that kind of rule of law, social decency, social whatever it is that we need to think about, we have to recognize that if you are lucky enough to have those early good secure attachments, that you feel safe, that you have all your kind of basic needs met, you're more likely to be able to fit and do things. But if any of those are not there, then it's harder. And I think that's how we let children down, especially in the school system, because they can't learn very well and they can't operate on those metrics. And also dogs, of course. And I think perhaps the most important area that we need to really readdress and challenge some of the received wisdoms is in that first 12 months of bringing up a dog.
We get blindsided in so many ways. I was blindsided when when my husband and I took home a rescue puppy, and you think you're doing great, right? Like you're doing a good thing. You want to help, and you taking in this little creature that needs care. But you don't necessarily, we didn't necessarily understand the scope of the care because of the developmental needs and the time frame. So when the puppy comes to you too soon, it hasn't had the benefit of living with its mama and its litter mates. And there's all kinds of neurodevelopment that goes on during that time, and social development and skills learning and even emotional regulation. And it's, for me, there was that aha moment where it's like, oh, there are special needs here beyond the basics of puppy rearing that I hadn't taken into account, because a lot of the books, they expect that you've taken a puppy home at 8 weeks or 12 weeks when it's developmentally more ready for that new home. But what if you haven't? What if you got the puppy like we did around 3 weeks or 4 weeks? And I used to laugh at my husband because he would cuddle with the puppy at night in front of the TV, and the puppy was like curled up in his little armpit, right? And the puppy was stuffed up in there. I thought it was funny. I took a photo. But I come to find out later how good that was for the puppy and how helpful on sensory development point of view, because she was without her litter too young, and that pressure on the skin, that's just a basic biological need. And that's not about that helps set the foundation for what they can do and what their reality will become, and how they're going to be wired in their brains. So throughout their lives, it's such a incredible world to realize so much is going on, and everything from the way the interactions, those first care interactions, the pressure, physical pressure, the sounds, the touch, the smells for the dogs, all those things are, and then how we can support that going forward. There's so much we can do for them.
For sure. And the wonderful Jen Shyrock, who's in the audience today. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Jennifer.
Group, yeah. I was just hearing you talking reminded me of the conversation that we had together, thinking about how sensitive and well developed that nervous system is right out of the box. So we might think the brain might not be learning much, but the nervous system totally is. And that kind of really foundated feeling of safety is so important. And so do check that chat out. It's on the Dog Centre Care YouTube channel. And this is the thing, isn't it? When we think about what you said a moment ago, made me think, really, especially when we're talking dogs here specifically, but the only thing that's different really is species specific need, of which many things we share, of course, and then species specific way of communicating need. Other than those two things, everything else is very much interconnected. So we just have to learn, what is your representation of safety? How do you need to feel that? What does that look like for you? How do you seek relief? What does that mean for you? What is your nervous system expecting from the world around you so that it can regulate well? The same fundamental foundations are across species.
Right. And I think of it also like children have a lot of variation among them. Right. So what one child finds wonderful and enjoyable and maybe chasing a ball down a field, it's just completely uninteresting to some other child who might be musical or might like reading. And so you have to tailor to the child as they grow older what their inclinations and interests are. And dogs have that predatory sequence. I mean, we're predators too. And the truth is, playing video games, we're exercising that predatory sequence for often. The more points we get, the more, scoring we get and get the target, whatever it is. Well, dogs have in varying degrees that interest too. So even the species specific things, there are parallels. Obviously, they're not identical, but they're parallels enough that I think we could appreciate how if you have let's say you have a superpower, your your superpower is drawing, I don't know, cartoons or something, and you want to do that superpower, like that's your thing. And imagine how frustrated you would be if you were deprived of that opportunity, just completely like your hands were tied and you were never given any resources to do that. And we can think for our dogs who may have their own superpower. I like to think of it just in a simple, that they want to exercise that in whatever is appropriate. And then we find a way where our community can do it safely and they can enjoy it safely. I want to just share, did you know today is World Otter Day? It was one of those weird things I learned from the internet. And the reason it caught me was because we just watched a wonderful documentary called, I think it's Billy and Molly, and it's about a man who lives up in the Shetland Islands and he befriends a wild otter. And so that's fine and good. What I kept noticing was he had a dog and his dog was a sheep dog, but they didn't have sheep. But he had given this dog a ball, sort of a spongy sort of ball. And this dog took this ball whenever, and he would throw it and he would hit it with his nose and he'd chase after it. And it was a way of fulfilling his herding needs while letting him live with his family. And so that's the dog's superpower. And even though there are no sheep there, they were giving this dog an opportunity to express that in its daily life. And of course, it also had a great life because it had acres and miles to run around without a leash and all kinds of other dog wonderland experiences. But I just funny for me, the otter was cute. I love the otter, but the dog, I was like, yeah, that ball, that was great.
Yeah, and I think when we think about hedonic budget, if you like, the things that we like to do and the thing we're almost driven to do and the things that gives us sustenance and that kind of thing. All of us experienced, I think, during the lockdowns, during COVID, what it felt like to be deprived of some of these things. And this is another thing about behavior, isn't it? We think about behavior as an expression of need, but also we think about behavior as an expression of self. And that's something we don't talk about enough. And it's important, actually. And a lot of the research now around people who are feeling socially excluded or lonely more generally, what that does to that sense of self regarding that hedonic budget, and also how it changes us neurologically and physiologically, the things that come along with that. And that's why social connection is so important, hence why there's a big emphasis in the book, and also in your work working with writing the books regarding children and parenting, regarding secure attachments and how much the social brain needs to find those and the fallout if they become insecure attachments.
Yeah, it's so profound. You think about an infant that's crying and what kind of response the infant gets to the cries. So perhaps it gets ignored. Perhaps it gets yelled at or slapped. Or perhaps somebody comes and cradles it and holds it and soothes the baby. And each of those babies is getting a very different lesson on what relationships can mean in life, right? Just from the get-go, before they have language, um, and the way they responded to it, because we need relationships from the day one. We're vulnerable as babies, and as we grow older, our neurochemistry is set up to need it, to reward us when we have good relationships. It's like you say, it's so integral. And attachment is tricky because we can be attached in a dysfunctional way. Of course, we can have an insecure attachment. And because it's so familiar, it may feel safe to us. That's what's so confusing, right? If if you had very mixed messages when you were a child, then you seek out other situations where you get mixed messages, for example, because that's the language you grew up with. But for ideal outcomes over the long term, you want to find that balance. You want the secure attachment where you know that you can go to the safe base, you know you have a secure, trustworthy other that you can go to, but you also can have some distance when you need it. It's not the fullest, most healthy form of attachment, most secure, gives you that flexibility so that you can have togetherness and you can have some alone time. And we can think of that for ourselves. Can we give that for ourselves? Is that even comfortable for ourselves? What's our own history with that? How do we do that for our dogs? How do we model that? It just, all these questions, when once you start to see the connections, it can be a very profound way to reflect on our own situation and what we bring with us. I know I had some wake-up calls that I didn't much like, but there they were. And you kind of have to forgive yourself and brush yourself off and say, all right, good job recognizing it. And what are some options that we can try going forward?
And that's a really important point there, Wendy, because I think when we think about our past trauma, our own insecure attachments, our own challenges, the first relationship that needs healing is the one with the one with ourself, actually, and that is a challenging thing, and we get glimpses of that healing in all sorts of different ways. I've worked with so many clients, I'm sure others will resonate. When we work in this way with their dogs, it unlocks something for them, and I have to support that emotional awareness as well, because they're like, right, I now see that. I've shared this story many times, but it was a powerful one for me. But I worked with a gentleman who was had a dog. He would bark and lunge at the dogs, and he'd hit the dog with the end of his lead when the dog barks, and we went through our process together. And he was able to say to me, once we worked through this very emotionally connected process, because that's how we like to work, really, that he understood now that the reason he was hitting his dog was because he was angry and embarrassed. And that was a deep thing for him. And then we had a longer conversation. He was ex-military, divorced. Anger was a theme for him. And actually, I remember seeing him at a talk I gave, probably about 12 months after I'd seen him, and he saw I was giving this talk at a local kind of thing, and he came along. And that whole process with his dog got him engaging in therapy for himself. So these things have powerful things. I remember working with a group of, I do a bit of work with local social services and things. And I remember being involved in an initiative, this is going back a while, before COVID, but and there was a group of young teenagers there, all with various challenges in life. And I was there talking about dogs and emotions and all this kind of stuff, and using the old bucket analogy, we like to use for the emotions and for the kind of nervous system. And this lad there, and we all had to really try hard not to stop crying, especially the key worker who was there, who'd been working with this young gentleman who had some anger issues. When we were doing things after, this young gentleman doesn't say very much, but he just said, you know what, I think my bucket's a bit full sometimes. It's just powerful, isn't it? Because he had a realization again, you know. Brilliant stuff. Powerful stuff already, I think. So I think now's a good time to go into your presentation, Wendy. And you can talk through some of these things that you've got on the slides and kind of provide a bit of a structure around some of these things. Would that be all right?
That would be lovely. And then hopefully there'll be time for me to come back and you can clarify some things as we need. So let me just pull this up here. Hang on, trying to get sorted. Can you see with just, is it focused directly on the main slide?
It looks great on Facebook. Yeah.
All right, great.
It's good. Yeah.
Right. So just encouraging people to think about how parenting experts can support our journey with dogs. And as Andrew was kind enough to point out, I come to this from having helped child development experts write these books. And the first one being The Connected Child. I don't know if you could see it. It was specifically for parents who welcome children from other countries or cultures, from troubled backgrounds, with special behavioral and emotional needs. So it's a particular kind of subset of children really struggling, some of them and their families. And then following on with Raising the Challenging Child with another group of wonderful folks who are from Chaddock Family Services. But this is just really quickly through my journey. There's little Hazel nestled in Norm's armpit there on the left. And about a day or two after we brought Hazel home, Karen Purvis, so I was still working with her on that first book, and she happened to come to our house to work with me in person. And the first thing she says to me when she sees the puppy is, "Has she pooped yet?" And of course, I thought, what? You know, I did a double take, like, who says this? This is weird. And then, I thought, well, you know, I think I've been waiting to see that. And she says, well, she's so little, she needed her mama to help her, get her system going. So Karen actually showed me how to use a wet washcloth and act like the mama and mama's tongue and massage the baby's belly and put a little oil on her nose and help get her system going. So that was my first clue that this was not your ordinary puppy situation. Like maybe there was more to it, but I was still so clueless. So when good health arrived, trouble arrived. That's basically what happened. And it was chaos, absolute chaos in the house, and nipping and biting and chasing and jumping and dashing. And like I was kind of on the front lines because my husband's a night owl. So while he was blissfully asleep, I was trying to handle the puppy and do all the things. And it was not working for me. I did not know what I was doing. And I was honestly, frankly, I was like, oh my God, how do parents cope? I am ready to bring this puppy back to the shelter. Like seriously, because I felt like I'm not qualified. I don't know what is going on here, but something's not right. And my husband he still believed in her, and I could not persuade him. So now what? And then I just had this moment. It's like, well, you know, I'm a struggling parent. Maybe there's something in these books that'll help me. And because in the book, they talked about children from hard places. Karen Purvis coined that term. And, you know, it was children who maybe had been moved to a new home. They had trauma. They still had attachment issues and sensory needs and developmental needs. And I needed to perhaps think about those things. And I tried something that was inspired by the book, and I call it a do-over. But honestly, it was as much a do-over for me as it was for the puppy. And what it really worked out is one morning, you know, I, I, the puppy started acting up. I couldn't get a leash on her, or collar on. I was getting bit. I just was freaking. I thought, nope, I'm going to do a do-over. I'm going to get calm. I'm going to slow down. I'm going to step back. I'm going to center myself. I'm going to try and channel Karen Purvis, and I'm going to give the dog a new chance, the puppy a new chance to interact with me differently. And the first time I did this, it was such a resounding success. It absolutely blew my mind. It was the first time that little Hazel had come over calmly and actually given me one lick. She was not a licker, but it was like her way of acknowledging. I had my hand reached out. I was calm and quiet. And it was this moment. It was like, oh, for goodness sakes, she's not out to get me. She wants to connect. She just doesn't know how. And I have to help her. To a lot of other people, that'd be obvious. But, I guess it wasn't obvious to me. And I just had wrong, I needed to shift my mindset. So I want to just mention, this is the intervention that informs the connected child. It's come to be called trust-based relational intervention. And I want to point it out because there's that word trust and there's the word relational. And that's so much, Andrew, of what you are encouraging us to think about with dogs. And Karen said, when you connect to the heart of a child, everything is possible. Well, and we think about, you put puppy or dog, so much more is possible. Maybe not everything, but a whole lot more. And this was really profound for me too. She says we always need to look beyond a difficult behavior and ask ourselves, what is the child really saying? And what does the child really need? Because the behavior could be very different and confusing. And it's up to us to try to look deeper and see what's behind it. So I'm just going to run through a few of the solutions, right? The techniques that work for children and for dogs. You want to build trust. One way to do it is something called affective touch, and that's like a soothing caress. And it's not just nice to have, it actually stimulates oxytocin. It stimulates neurochemistry. We can build and develop a relationship. And that man is not going to hit that dog. He's going to play with that dog there with the stick, just to clarify. I just noticed it now. That maybe could be misconstrued. But you see, it looks happy. And here we have talking about what we're seeking. We're looking for that balance of relationship. Secure attachment would be the more centered, where we don't want to be so scared and nervous that we're clingy and overdependent. And we don't want to be so scared and nervous that we just run away because that we're terrified that we'll be hurt or injured in some way. So what I call therapeutic parenting is what you're working for towards secure attachment. And we have different ways we can do it. We can slow down, we can teach to their level. We consider their developmental stage. And I talk about this a little in the book. House training is a natural behavior for dogs. But putting that leash on and walking on a leash, that is not a natural behavior in a wild dog. Mama dogs don't leash up their puppies. So we have to realize that's actually maybe more advanced than I was realizing, certainly. It was something we had to build up to, and until the puppy could integrate feeling and touch and understand that it wasn't being stung and assaulted every time the leash draped on her body. These are things that, once we try to put it from their perspective, we get a different appreciation. So I like to think about needs less and not so much about naughty, because that just helps open the possibilities when we think about needs. And I just want to show some pictures because, and one thing I want to point out is on the left where I have my hand on her, I had to learn to touch her properly. I was so freaked out by all her biting and scrambling around that I would hold her like by fingertips And that's not an attachment building way to touch, right? If you're touching with more of a whole hand, with a solid, steady, gentle pressure, and that's what I was trying to do in that picture with Hazel on the left. I was getting better at it, and she responded to it, right? But if you're so nervous and you can't connect with little, fingertips, it's something to think about. I needed to think about it. And then she went through all her little destructive phases. There she is. She chewed up a pool float, and later when we would have her out and she would run, off lead, and she would run ahead of us, and then she'd wait and say, "Are you coming?" Like, this is her waiting. Well, are you coming? Come on. And so I love that shot. And here at the bottom, she's getting along with the cats, which was one of my terrors in the beginning. I was sure she was going to grow up and, assassinate the cats. But in fact, it didn't work out that way. So that's our quick little tour. But I wanted to do a thought experiment with everybody, if you'll indulge me for a moment here. I hope you can see there are different kinds of hands in each of these quadrants. And I wanted to invite everybody to look at these hands and think about when you were growing up, if you had to characterize how you were treated and the kind of hands you remember from parents and caregivers, which resemble these the most? So I'll say in the upper left, those hands are kind of to the person's side and not really engaged very much. On the upper right, the hand is offering and giving, and on the lower left is a fist, right? And it's a different kind of hand. On the bottom right, you have two hands that are loosely cradling and potentially available to support you. And the reason I like to do this in a visual is because this is before language for a lot of us, and dogs don't have language. It's something that we can think about where we come from. We can also think about the care that we're offering to the dogs. And each of these quadrants represents a different kind of parenting style according to research. So here's how it breaks down as far as when you look at it in parenting styles. You'll notice on the horizontal upper, you see from left to right, there's more responsive, meaning how much every action we take is either not very responsive to the little one's needs, or it's more responsive to the little one's needs. And if we look on the left, we're talking about how demanding the parent is. In other words, how many rules and expectations and strictness all fall into that, and it can be low or high. So if you map these into 4 styles, if the parenting style is sort of low responsive and low demanding, you kind of get an unengaged parent. It could be neglectful ultimately, right? They don't really get involved for whatever reason. Maybe they're busy, maybe they're out working. It's just not, we don't know the reason. But let's say the style is always giving, it's always responding to the needs, but it's not very demanding. And there are some implications there. We'll come back to that. If we go where it's very demanding, but not highly responsive, that's where you get the fist, potentially. That's my way or the highway kind of thinking. And I put the star in the bottom right because this is what this area is where research shows that the best long-term outcomes for parenting styles, tons of research on this, and it applies to dogs too. There's more and more research there. But the style that marries responsiveness with structure can really have wonderful outcome. And I will invite everybody to think about too, when you look at these hands, what would make you feel more safe? In the presence of which of these hands would you feel more safe? And that's one way to think of why that bottom right can be so beneficial, because you do get some needs met, but you also know that there's an adult in charge who can make decisions and can help guide you. And it's not all up to you as a little person or a little dog to have to know the way around the world. So you have that support as well. So that I find that so fascinating, and we can reflect on that for all the choices that we make when we interact with our dogs. Obviously, we're not going to be perfect all the time, and some decisions are going to veer toward one or the other, but it's a really helpful thing. And I'm just jumping ahead because Andrew talked about child-centered programs and dog-centered care. That bottom quadrant with the star where it's what's called authoritative, and I call it therapeutic parenting style, that's supported by these different practices. And it's just, I was thrilled and astonished to see the parallels between some progressive evidence-informed dog handling and how it correlated for children. And I'm just going to pick out a couple. We could spend all kinds of time on this, but I got a big kick at it. For example, like ACE free work, which the wonderful Sarah Fisher, there are things like theraplay on the children's side, where and well, actually also there's Anna Banyel, there's the child-centered programs, there's free play, which is so beneficial. I was also thinking with the Playway for Amy Cook. That's where theraplay corresponds nicely. There's so much overlap and reinforcement. The idea that safety and bringing out the best in each. I want to, because this is such a interesting and interested community, I wanted to share this too, Andrew, because you talked about beyond the operant, and this is my way of looking at some of that too. Why positive reinforcement can be tricky. Sometimes it really can support best, practices according to the authoritative therapeutic style. And when you get that good balance of being sensitive and responsive, as well as using positive reinforcement, but there are some risks to it. You could fall into too much indulgence and too little structure, and that reduces the feeling of safety. Or you can be too demanding with it and end up sensitizing the dog. And maybe this is too in the weeds, but I just found it so interesting that that individual experience is just really essential to make space for that in our interactions. And let's see what I'm not sure. Well, I'm going to quit right here because there's a lot to talk about. So unless you want, let me unshare and get some thoughts from you, Andrew.
Oh, no, I was really into that. All. Could we put the slideshow back up and just have the next slide, the hearts one?
Okay, sure.
If that's okay, and then we can have a chat. That was a really good way to kind of bring that together a little bit. If we could put
Okay.
that, yeah.
There we go.
There you go. Great.
Yeah, this was yeah. I'll orient folks to it. So we talked about there's such a deep toolkit of ways to help at-risk children, and then similarly at-risk dogs. And I was just I apologize for the one more acronym in the world of acronyms, but for me, it was a helpful way to put these things in buckets because it's just such a huge universe. And so getting clear on the goals helps me just stay focused and without getting too prescriptive. And the idea is the first point is heal the body, because if we overlook pain, if we overlook needs of some other medical condition or anything else, the behavior is never going to be what you're hoping, because it's just think of myself, if I'm hungry and tired and exhausted, My husband knows to steer clear usually. So just like all of us. So for E would be engage and optimize the brain. And what's so interesting is that sensory engagement with the world and movement and play, these all optimize the brain and they help us self-regulate. It's just part of emotional well-being. And it's true for dogs too. It's amazing. Appropriate environments with felt safety. So we think about an austere kennel and tiny little kennels versus freedom to run around and sniff the world and get out in nature. That's one example. R for respectful and secure relationships. I qualified it there. You notice I didn't just say relationships because relationships are not all equal. And those of us who have a background of some trauma or issues of one sort or another, you'll hear me. But the idea is to be respectful to help build secure and trusting relationships. So the other thing I like about the HEARTS acronym is that teaching is important, but it's not the whole picture. It's a piece of the picture, and it can support the other pieces, but it doesn't work on its own. And so it helps me see that like dog training is a piece of this, but it doesn't substitute for helping them be safe or having a healthy body. It's just part of the whole picture. And I also want to mention the teaching sensitively. There's something that comes up thinking about eye contact, which is for some children is deeply aversive. And yet there are interventions that insist on the child making eye contact. And this, we see more studies come out in the autism spectrum community who say they were traumatized by interventions that insisted that they give eye contact. And that's what they were rewarded for. And so in a similar way, there are some dogs who really don't want to make eye contact. But we can still relate to them effectively and we can still support them and those children too. It's just a matter of being sensitive and going at their pace as best we can. So, and then of course, S, HEARTS is plural. We want to support the individual, and that could mean considering their developmental stage. It could mean their background of perhaps trauma. It could mean whether they love chasing and biting or whether they love guarding and observing, whether they're a sight hound or a terrier who wants nothing more than to find the mice, behind the wood pile. For dogs, that's supporting the individual. Each of them will have their skill, their superpower, their talent. And if we can bring all these hearts together, that's why I did this, is they all work better together, right? That's you really, that's what that's about for me. So.
Oh, great. I'm glad we went into that. I love that. Always room for another acronym, especially a really good one like that. Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes left, Wendy. I just want to go through a few things then. I'm going to say again, I just, when you sent the book, you very kindly sent me a copy ahead of time to have a look at things. And I read a lot of books, and this one really hit home for me. I think it's just the way that you take people through this journey, really. And so again, if you haven't already, do check it out. A lot of this stuff is in here. It's all in here. And it's interesting you mentioned there about understanding the negative, potentially coercive potential of reinforcement. We have to be mindful of that. That's all it is. And that is something that I find that can be challenging actually for some in the training community who have really put a lot of value in reinforcement as being the end, the thing to aim for. And I think also, I love how you frame the notion of training and teaching. One thing I really want to stress, this is just my opinion, this is not about being anti-training. And I see those messages come up. I think we have to understand potential cons of just having a purely operant training approach. But this is not about not doing things. It's just about, I love how you framed it about being more sensitive to the dog. I think it's also about being more sensitive to that situation and really asking questions about, well, is this helpful what I'm training? Is this more for me or for the dog? And if it is just more for you, that's okay too, but it's just being honest about it. But we have to fundamentally think about what is intrinsically valuable for the child and the dog in regards to their version of safety and their ability to self-regulate.
I agree completely, 1,000%, Andrew. It's there's great wisdom in so many approaches, and one of the things I enjoyed so much about working on this book was I got to speak with so many people and share so many stories, and there's so much creativity out there. Different people who are trainers, and in finding the right mixture of sensitivity and direction for the animal they're working with, and had a veterinarian weigh in, wonderful Christopher Pockel, the veterinary behaviorist, and people in the dog sports communities, people who just work with families, with kids trying to coexist with their dogs. There's a lot of creativity we can bring to this, just when we lay out what are the needs that we might overlook, and what questions do we want to ask. That's as much why I did this book, is what questions should we be asking ourselves when we choose a trainer? If we do need a trainer, what we might think about, well, what is their parenting style, and does that have implications for the the dog that we care about so much, and also just for ourselves, like the grace that we can give ourselves as part of this process. And I appreciate, like, everybody who's participating and thinking about these things, because they really want the best for the animals that they live with, and to move the conversation forward. I think it's beautiful.
I love that, moving it forwards, because I think when we think about training specifically, moving away from a very punitive, corrective approach to more of a positive one was moving on, for sure. And we've definitely got to a point that we can do the task stuff more humanely and nicer. But this very much is about moving forward. How do we move forward? I think the move to positive reinforcement isn't the end of the story. That's what we've learned through child educational psychology and development. We had a lot of children, especially in probably the 80s, early 90s, especially neurodivergent community, as you were talking about, where positive reinforcement was really a big thing. But the person who was employing that reinforcement had their own safe worldview that they were trying to get the child to fit into, because if you behave like this, everything will be okay. But as you say, even something as fundamental as you must have good eye contact if you're going to have a conversation, that could be deeply traumatic, actually. So moving forward for the child side of things is that individual child-centered care approach, thinking about the individual child and helping them to have some foundated safety first, and then seeing what those layers might look like. And I think that's what we're trying to achieve here for dogs, isn't it?
You've done a marvelous job of keeping that conversation going in such a rich and multi-dimensional way. I'm delighted and privileged to participate. Thank you, Andrew.
Well, I've seen the group, a few people have said that we need a part 2, and I think we definitely need to speak again, because it's a lot. These hour chats are kind of introduction to things, really, and I think we've really done it. Well, you have a really good service to thinking, giving us the opportunity to think about some of the parallels here, and to introduce some of these principles. But maybe we could have you back, Wendy, and we could perhaps deep dive into something. I think that would be amazing.
That would be amazing.
We've got the book. So the book is Tender Paws. It is a really well-referenced book. And I think the beautiful thing about it is I think it's just really appealing to anybody, whether you're a caregiver, professional, whatever capacity, really. And you could easily replace the word dog with child for most of it. I think, and that's the beautiful thing there, and do so safely, actually, talking about without feeling, well, maybe that's a bit grey. It's like, no, I could be confidently replace that word with that one, because we share so much, as you say, especially in this regards to feeling safe and seeking those secure attachments and how important that is. And I read something really powerful recently from a child psychologist. I can't remember their name, so apologies there, but you referenced it a little bit earlier. When we think about how insecure attachments start to become created, but for the individual, they don't, that's what they know, and they still might feel safe in that sense, but it's a different version of safety. And they said that the issue there for the child is when they reach out, when they have need and those needs aren't met, they don't love the parent any less, they love themselves less. And I thought that was really powerful. And that's the thing that we know about going through therapies around trauma more widely, but specifically around kind of how we deal with recognizing the role of insecure attachments when we're older, is creating a more safe relationship with self first. Because you start to see that damage, then you start to see the things that how it affects you.
Yeah, it's it can be a shock to learn some of these things about yourself too, if you really let yourself look. But it's so enriching, and that healing, it, like you say, that's an important step for. I love the story you told about that man realizing that it was his frustration speaking and his need to feel in control. I think that's true for many people, many
Yes.
people.
And it is, what the biggest factor in most things, like here in the UK, I genuinely think we've got a welfare crisis really with dogs, based purely upon a lack of awareness. A lot of our own issues around ourselves is a lack of self-awareness. This is the key. We kind of, our brain wants to create these kind of safe little world views, these safe little bubbles that we can inhabit, and doesn't want to be questioned a lot of the time when we think about a lot of the cognitive biases and distortions that we create, because the brain doesn't want to have to reappraise. So it's hard. It just is hard. And it's much better that people feel supported and safe, like that gentleman did, to come to some of that self-awareness realization, because it's profoundly deep, and they are less likely to be that again because they've learned something deeply and viscerally. I think it's important.
Yes, and you're describing a process I think some therapists call similar to something called motivational interviewing, where you hear them first and you let them share their truth first, and then ask them to think through what do they want to do with this, and is this where they want to be with it. You're more experienced, and bringing that human side in is so helpful and so beneficial, I imagine, to the families that you work with. We all want to be sensitive that way as much as we can.
And we all want to feel heard. And I think we can overlook that with the caregiver sometimes with our clients, because especially if we are feeling a bit vulnerable ourselves and we feel I've got to show up today and show you what I know, and I'm gonna show how we're going to do things, everything else. Well, the caregiver still might not feel heard, their own experience, their own mix of emotions around their dog, who they love and they care for, but at the same time feel embarrassed by, frustrated by. This is the challenge for parents with their children, of course, and it gets messy. It gets messy.
Extremely messy is a great word for it.
Yeah, messy. It gets messy, and that's okay too. Everything's okay. In my book, Wendy, everything's okay. I never want anybody to not feel that whatever they feel, even if they feel it's messy, is not valid. But it's about our relationship with these things and what we think about moving forward. It's been amazing tonight. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Please don't forget. So you mentioned Barks. What a great opener that was. We've got Saujanya here as part of the Barks series. Barks are going to be coming in doing all these wonderful presentations. So this will be a proper presentation. So I won't be talking, nobody glad about that. So Jenny will be talking about multi-dog households and kind of friction within those households and how we can think about things in the Barks way, which is a more relational, emotional way. So that's really exciting. Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you, Wendy. Thank you so much. Really appreciate tonight. And let's have you back.
It would be my pleasure. Thank you so much. Great conversation, as always.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, everybody. See you soon.
Cheers.